Howdy again everyone, and in the test lab today we have a brand new autofocus full frame lens from 7Artisans, their AF24mm f1.8. It comes in at a very low price of only $329 for a full frame lens of this kind. That's potentially a bit of a bargain. Well, if it's any good of course, and it's currently for Sony E, Nikon Z and L-mount mirrorless camera systems. I'd like to thank 7Artisans for sending me one of these lenses for evaluation, although as usual this is a totally independent review. I personally love 24mm f1.8 lenses on a full frame camera. They offer most of the creativity of a 24mm f1.4 lens while being smaller and way less expensive. I love their combination of a dramatically wide angle with a noticeably out of focus background at f1.8. Additionally, that bright maximum aperture enables you to shoot indoors or in darker conditions with much faster shutter speeds, which is always useful. The lens's build quality is about the same as 7Artisans' similar full-frame autofocus lenses, metallic, slightly large, and solid. It's not weather sealed, but we still get a USB-C port here for future firmware updates. At 400 grams or a little under a pound, it's not too heavy. The aperture and manual focus rings turn very smoothly, albeit heavily. There is no option to set the aperture ring to click at each stop. The focus motor is responsive enough to that ring being turned, and we don't see any real focus breathing on the lens either, although we do get a little distortion warping as you focus in and out. The lens's autofocus motor runs silently and accurately. In single shot autofocus mode, the lens runs a little slower than average. Switch over to autofocus continuous mode though, and its speed picks up just a little. The lens comes with a plastic hood which fits on nice and firmly. Its filter thread size is 62mm and it does not have its own optical stabilization. On that subject, I noticed that my camera's in-body stabilization did not work properly with this lens unless I manually set it to 24mm in the camera's menu. That was on a new Sony A7CR, so watch out for that. Once I did have it set up manually, it worked perfectly though. Apart from that minor niggle, everything else about the lens's build quality is fine here, considering its low price. Well, let's see what its image quality is like. We'll start on a full frame camera, so today it's getting treated to the brutal 61 megapixel sensor of my Sony A7CR. In-camera corrections are turned on for this test. If you want images zoomed into the 42 megapixel ratio of my older reviews, by the way, for comparison purposes, then you can find a link to a special unlisted video in the description below. Alright, at f1.8 in the middle of the image we're seeing good sharpness and very good contrast. Stop down to f2.8 though, and the middle is razor sharp throughout. Let's open the aperture back up to f1.8 and look over into the corners. Okay, as you can see, they are much softer with some colour fringing. This is kind of what I was expecting to see. Stop down to f2.8 though for lots more sharpness, contrast and brightness. At f4 and f5.6, corner image quality is now looking very good, although a little of that chromatic aberration is seeping in. At f8, the image starts to get a little softer due to diffraction. At f11 though, the image is softer than I expected, and at f16, way softer. So I suspect there's an issue here with the lens's aperture mechanism. My guess is that it's stopping down further than it should do, which is causing extra diffraction. So keep away from those dark apertures. Overall though, for a low budget lens, this is an okay performance when you consider how challenging a 61 megapixel sensor really is. It's not the sharpest lens in its corners, but it's always great in the middle of your images, and contrast is always strong as well. Okay, well let's switch the camera over to crop mode and see how the lens would perform on a 26 megapixel APS-C camera. At f1.8, again, the middle looks quite sharp with very good contrast. Stop down to f2 to see perfect sharpness in the middle. Well, let's open back up and take a look in the image corners. Okay, it's a bit of a better performance than those full frame corners. They are looking a little softer than the middle on APS-C, but still not bad. There are tiny improvements at f2 and f2.8, although a touch of that colour fringing is still visible. And, well, that's as sharp as the lens gets on APS-C, so it's a marginally better performance, not razor sharp, but good nonetheless. Okay, let's turn off in-camera corrections and take a look at distortion and vignetting. The lens displays a slightly wavy distortion pattern here, with a strong pinch of pincushion distortion in the corners. Vignetting is quite strong at f1.8 also. Unusually, stopping down to f2.8, f4 or even f5.6 makes little difference to that vignetting, so it will always require correction. Speaking of corrections, here's an image taken at f1.8 with in-camera corrections turned on. As you can see, the vignetting is cleared up well enough, but we actually see more pincushion distortion than we did in the original uncorrected image. But it's in a simpler pattern, so it might actually be a little easier to correct in editing if you want to, so just a heads up about that. The lens can only focus down to about 32 centimeters to your subject, so it's definitely not going to be confused with a macro optic anytime soon. And unfortunately, image quality takes a serious plunge when shooting up close, as you can see here. It's about the same at f2, stop down to f2.8 and close-up image quality becomes acceptable, but at f4 it's finally sharp. Next, work against bright light. There's definitely more flaring here than usual, quite a bit actually, but at least it's not too opaque. I have seen worse than this before. While we're working in the dark, let's take a look at chroma levels. The corner image quality isn't really all that sharp here, but from what we can see, there's no real chroma issues, which is nice. Let's zoom out and look for sunstars then. They're beginning to emerge at f5.6, but it's at f8 that they become nice and clear. At f11 and f16 they become really quite strong, but as you can see, the image is also getting darker than before due to that strange aperture problem. Next, Bokeh. And the good news is that that's a strong point of the tested lens. This thing's out-of-focus backgrounds look gorgeous. They're fantastically smooth in almost every situation, almost like there's some kind of apodization filter in there. So that is definitely a strong redeeming quality. And finally, related to Bokeh comes longitudinal chromatic aberration. At f1.8, things are looking a little ghostly here, but there's not much colour fringing on Bokeh highlights to be seen. Stop down to f2.8 to see anything that was there, mostly gone, so that's another little above average performance. Overall, even though it has quite a few weaknesses, I ended up strangely quite enjoying my time with the 7Artisans 24mm f1.8. Its image quality is not the sharpest in its image corners, and it has other optical issues. There are a few oddities with the lens's communication with the camera too. Its in-camera corrections don't quite work, well, correctly, and on my A7CR, in order for in-body image stabilization to work properly, I had to manually set it to 24mm. Perhaps those issues can be fixed with a firmware upgrade. Also, the aperture mechanism didn't seem quite right at f11 and f16. So yes, it's a lens with quite a few weaknesses to say the least, but my images with it always ended up looking really nice because there's always plenty of contrast, and its bokeh looks surprisingly amazing here too, leading to pretty striking images if you're not pixel peeping too much. Considering its low price, if you're on the market for a bright 24 but you're on a very limited budget, then this one could be a workable choice if you're happy with its limitations, and I did like the pictures it produced. Alright, thanks for watching everyone. Check out the playlists on my channel for more lens reviews for your camera system, and check out my Patreon or channel memberships if you feel like supporting the work I do to bring you these sponsorship free reviews and get a bunch of extra bonus content as well. Ciao for now.